Hello again, Tom Linsky here, and I'm going to be doing another Histobrick build. This one's going to be unique. You may remember that I built the SS United States in front of the SS United States in Philadelphia. This is in a similar vein, unfortunately not quite the same, because that's physically impossible. But we're going to be building the SS Great Eastern, and we are here in Portland, Maine. About 100 feet behind me is the Great Eastern dock. Now, the Great Eastern's operators were not great people. They liked to take advantage of anyone they worked with and burned them at times. They played multiple cities in North America against each other, including New York City, Portland, Maine, Toronto, over where the Great Eastern's first destination was going to be. And Portland, Maine, they were really schmoozing it. They actually had an agreement that the Great Eastern would dock in Portland, Maine, and the Grand Trunk Railroad and the city of Portland actually split the costs to build the railroad out to Portland, out to the Great Eastern terminus right down the street. Great Eastern would dock right here at the end where the water was the deepest, and the city put $60,000 in 1859 money into that, and the Grand Trunk Railroad picked up the rest. And as the Great Eastern was sailing, they decided to just skip Portland altogether and went to New York City. They were playing them against each other. Well, the city of Portland was quite burned by that. So as a little bit of making amends, I've decided to bring a miniature Great Eastern here and build it right where the Great Eastern was supposed to end up. But for added authenticity, I have this oil lamp right next to me, and this is from my collection, and this is from the Great Eastern. It was taken off at some point when she was laying the transatlantic cable. It has all the maker's marks on it. I don't know how old the wick is, and I know that the glass on top of it is not original, but the brass piece is. And if you smell inside, you can still smell the old oil. Now, I don't know if it's been lit since, probably has been, but it's nice to smell that and think that you could be catching a whiff of the old Great Eastern right there. We got the wooden box. There she is. Colored instructions as always. This one is 506 pieces. That's going to be great. We're going to be able to get through this one pretty quickly. It is quite cold out, and my hands are going to go numb. There's the historical write-up that I put together a while ago, and 121 steps. However, only 506 pieces, so this will not be too long of a build. Whole bunch of UV printed parts, adding further detail to it. I'm going to be careful with my pieces because I don't want them to fall through this workbench and out into the... just get lost. So I'm going to keep them in the box this time. Alright, now as always, we're starting with laying the ship's keel. The Great Eastern was a massive ship for her time. She was built in 1859. And when she was built, she was by far the largest ship. She was several times the tonnage of smaller ships, the average ship at the time. And it took decades before another ship was heavier than her, or longer than her. Her construction was an absolute ordeal. It took several years for her to be completed, several additional months for her to be launched after the failure of the first launch. Now, even though she was an absolute giant for her time, she's one of the smaller Histobrick kits that we're going to be building. So when we get to the later ships that you've seen already built on this channel, such as the Titanic or the Olympic or even the Queen Mary and SS United States, she's really dwarfed by them. So now we have the backbone of the ship. We have her keel line built up. So we have an idea of how big she's going to be when she's done. Now we're moving on to the upper hull now. For those of you who were wondering in the last video, I was asking why we have bright, vibrant colors on the inside pieces which aren't going to be visible. I was wondering why, and people answered that in the comments. It's just because the color doesn't really matter on those steps. They usually pick bright colors that stand out from the rest of the kit, just to make those steps a little easier and quicker for you, which I certainly appreciate. I spend a good half of the time just trying to pick out which pieces are next from the pile. We have the first UV printed part, which is this assembly right here, which actually comes pre-assembled, because I guess it was printed like this by Tom. The city of Portland was, rightly so, very angry, having been snubbed the way that they were by the great ship company. The newspapers were pissed. They were writing so many articles about what should be done to punish the Great Eastern's operators, including sending agents down to New York City where the ship was on display and forcing them to come up to Portland, leaving behind New York and sail right on up here. The city had even said that it would not have been so bad if the company had still gone to New York City, but just stopped by Portland first to give them the honor of being the first city destination of the Great Eastern, but they didn't even do that. The Great Eastern was an absolute mess her entire career. I don't think her operators, no matter who they were, because she changed hands a few times, I don't think she ever turned a profit. Now, she may have during the transatlantic cable laying, but aside from that, I don't think she ever turned a profit as a passenger liner. Okay, got some more UV printed parts getting put on. This is side of the hull and the bow. And now we're going to begin building one side of the hull. And here we're actually placing the ship's nameplate onto her. Great Eastern, right above that white stripe. And then this goes right on the side of the ship. Just like that. And now we're going to do the same thing on the ship's starboard. Once again, we got the nameplate going on, this time for the port side. And making decent progress. Once you actually have about half of the steps done, it's a lot quicker to sort through your parts and find everything you're going to need. Obviously, because there's fewer parts on the tray. There really just is something lovable about the Great Eastern. The clumsiness of it, the size of it. It's like a big clumsy bear just bumping around and knocking things over and, you know, killing someone here and there. There's just a little charm to it. We've now finished this side section. It appears that it's going onto the port side. And this opening right here is going to be for the paddle box. Okay, the cold is really getting to me. We're about 2/3 of the way done. The ship is coming together. One of these old Victorian homes behind the camera, they got a fire going. There's just something so welcoming about smelling a warm fire on a really cold day. We have the basis for the opening of the paddle box, this time on the starboard side. And that snaps into place. This looks great so far. It looks like the next step is going to be building those paddle boxes, or at least we have a spoke for one, this nice long part going through here. I can't quite tell the length. I suppose it's this medium one, not the long one. The medium ones or the long ones are probably going to be the masts. These are multiple pieces that came assembled like this because they're all printed parts. I suppose it was just easier to print them with the parts together and then stick them in the box like that. The assemblies around the paddle wheels are what we're going to be doing next. These are all UV printed because they all have that white stripe going along it. There we go, that's the assembly of the structure around the paddle wheel. Now we're doing the side of the hull for the stern, and we're starting on the port. But unlike earlier steps, we're just building this right onto the side of the ship as opposed to a separate assembly that then gets snapped into place at the end. Coming together. It's really coming together. I didn't think we'd ever reach this point. Okay, next we're doing the assembly for the upper stern. Oh, we got sledders behind us. A bunch of kids over there sledding in the snow, having a better time than I am. Not that I don't enjoy building these kits, I definitely do. I'm just cold. I'm so cold. I can't put gloves on and do this. And that'll go on right here. It'll hook into place right there. Almost like on a hinge, but it's locked into place a little bit. That was one of my only gripes about the Titanic, how the bow, the new Titanic kit, how the bow was on hinges and came together. We're using the same hinged mechanism here, but I see another plate locks that into place. People talk about how big the Titanic was, but the Great Eastern was huge. I mean, yeah, the Titanic was bigger than her, but the other ships in 1912, if you sat them side by side next to the Titanic, like the other large ships, Titanic wasn't that much bigger. Especially if you sat her next to the Olympic, you wouldn't even really be able to see the difference in size. With the Great Eastern, she dwarfed everything around her. In fact, she was a meme for the time. There were cartoons of hotels on board. While you were in the middle of a voyage, if you wanted to go out to the countryside, there was an English country manor on board in the stern. Obviously there wasn't, but it was mocking that the ship was so big, it was almost like it would need its own public transportation systems. They were also joking that if ships continued to develop at the same rate as the Great Eastern did, the bow of the ship would actually be at the destination before the stern had completely departed the harbor of origin. Those Victorians were some cheeky chaps. And these two gray rods act as the ship's bridge. The term bridge actually originates from paddle steamers like these, because there would have been bridges between the two paddle boxes. And this is where the captain or the man on watch would have stood and looked out. And that's where the term bridge comes from, because they actually were bridges back then. Looks like we're starting on the masts, perhaps the funnels. No, we're doing the funnels now. So each funnel is 3 white cylinders high. I am completely losing mobility in my fingers, which is not ideal when you're building a Lego kit. The Great Eastern went through so many different redesigns throughout her career, especially in paint scheme. We have them done now, and we're snapping them into these slots. She has 5, which I believe is unique. I may be incorrect, but I don't think there was any other ship with 5 funnels, at least not a passenger liner. Onto the masts. They're each these long black rods with a black minifigure hand. The masts also do come in various sizes, so you have to be sure that the two shortest ones are on the bow and the stern. Onto the sails, which are optional, I believe, because the Great Eastern didn't always fly canvas, as they say. Her engine broke down enough that she actually did have it up quite often. Now we're building these unique furled sail designs. I like what he did here. Adds some life to it, makes it feel like she's billowing. The gulls are out in full force today. Seagulls are stupid. Crows. Crows are smart. Crows will remember you. Crows are good at problem solving. Seagulls are just dumb. They're not gonna... It wouldn't be a fair fight, so I'm not even gonna try. That's it. Okay, now these slappers get stuck on. We have one for each mast, so nobody gets left out. Then, the last step, the flag, the absolute last step. I don't have the part. Oh well, I don't care. Gotta stick the flag on. I don't know where my flag is. I must have dropped it. I don't care. It's so cold. It looks great as is. Calling it a day. Here she is, the Great Eastern, as she was in 1860 on her maiden voyage. We have 506 Lego pieces. These are actual Lego parts, not a knockoff or anything like that. This is a third-party kit. It's not authorized by Lego, but it does use those genuine parts. You can find this for sale at Histobrick.com. I highly recommend it. The Great Eastern is one of my favorite ships ever. It is beautiful to see her, and it's great to finally have a model. So here she is in Portland, Maine. After 160 years, the Great Eastern finally shows up in Portland, Maine. Just over my left shoulder here is the Great Eastern dock. That is where the Great Eastern was supposed to go on her maiden voyage, but they changed their mind last minute. So here she is, at her first ever dock. It was not a hard build. It was nice to be able to do a paddle steamer finally, and especially seeing these UV printed parts to add the detail to the paddles. The sails were finicky. I don't know if they're actually even going to stay on, but the rest of the assembly was very straightforward, easy to do. 506 pieces. It did take a little longer than I expected. This took almost as long as the Titanic to build, which really sucks at this temperature. But other than that, it's a very nice build.